Welcome to the One in the Many. My name is Arshak Ben-Lian. My purpose with the One in the Many podcast is to explore the process of integration as developmentally formative and therapeutically corrective factor in human psychology. The One in the Many is the study of how conscious life differentiates identity, integrates relation, regulates itself under constraint, and sustains direction through time. Subscribe to the One in the Many podcast and connect with me by writing to abenlian@oneinthemany.net. The development of psychological theory across the last century reveals a gradual convergence toward a single insight. Cognition is neither the passive reception of sensory impressions, nor the arbitrary construction of internal models detached from reality. Rather, cognition is a structured process through which the individual progressively aligns himself with the relational order of existence. The apparent differences between major frameworks such as ecological psychology, predictive processing, and integrative epistemology reflect differences of emphasis within a shared explanatory trajectory. Each attempts to articulate how mind and world come into systematic correspondence. When considered together, they reveal cognition as a recursive process of differentiation and integration, through which perception becomes knowledge and knowledge becomes meaning. The ecological approach to perception developed by James Gibson begins from the premise that the environment is not an amorphous flux of stimuli, but a structured field containing invariant relations. These invariants are available to man through active exploration. Perception is therefore direct in the sense that the individual does not construct the basic structure of reality, but detects relations that are already present within it. The concept of affordances expresses this principle. The environment offers possibilities for action relative to the individual's capacity. Perception is thus relational rather than subjective. The person does not impose order upon chaos, but becomes progressively attuned to the order that exists. Contemporary neuroscience, particularly predictive processing models, emphasizes the individual's internal contribution to this process. The nervous system continuously generates expectations regarding incoming sensory structure and modifies those expectations in response to discrepancies between prediction and experience. Learning occurs through the reduction of prediction error, resulting in increasingly stable correspondence between internal organization and environmental structure. Though framed in probabilistic language, the fundamental insight parallels Gibson's ecological realism. Cognition improves when the structure of the individual becomes more aligned with the structure of the environment. The person becomes more capable of anticipating lawful relations within reality. An integration-centered framework, such as the One in the Many, extends these insights by emphasizing the hierarchical organization through which relations become increasingly coherent across time. Perception is not merely the detection of isolated invariants, but the progressive integration of differentiated elements into unified structures of understanding. Each act of integration preserves relations that may be used to generate further relations. The development of knowledge, therefore, follows a recursive trajectory in which prior integrations become the basis for future integrations. Memory stabilizes this process by preserving both the content of prior distinctions and the methods through which those distinctions were formed. The individual learns not only what is real, but how to identify reality more effectively. Within this unified model, cognition may be understood as an iterative loop linking environmental structure, organismic organization, prediction, error detection, and integration. Environmental structure provides lawful relations independent of the observer. The individual, though through its existing structure, encounters these relations as affordances for action and understanding. Predictions based on prior learning guide attention toward relevant distinctions. Mismatch between expectation and observation produces an informational gradient that stimulates further differentiation. Integration reorganizes internal structure to reduce incoherence. Memory consolidates the results of this process, enabling future perception to operate with greater precision and economy. Over time, the individual develops increasing sensitivity to invariant relations, increasing efficiency in forming new integrations, and increasing coherence across domains of experience. Meaning emerges within this process as the experiential correlate of successful integration. When relations among perceived elements stabilize in a manner that supports effective action, uncertainty decreases and understanding increases. Meaning is therefore not an arbitrary projection, but the recognition of coherent relations within reality. The individual experiences meaning when its internal organization reflects the structure of its environment sufficiently to guide action reliably. Knowledge becomes possible because reality possesses identity and because consciousness possesses the capacity to identify that identity progressively across context and time. The convergence of ecological realism, predictive processing, and integrative epistemology, therefore, leads to a reaffirmation of the most fundamental axiomatic principles of philosophy. The recursive alignment between person and environment presupposes that reality possesses determinate structure. The person can improve its capacity to perceive because there are invariant relations available to be perceived. This corresponds to the axiom that existence exists. Reality is what it is independent of the wishes or constructions of the observer. Without stable existence, no process of attunement or prediction could converge toward coherence. Similarly, the progressive refinement of perception presupposes a faculty capable of identifying what exists. Consciousness is not an inert container, but an active process of differentiation and integration. Through repeated cycles of interaction with reality, consciousness becomes increasingly capable of identifying relations that were previously indistinct. This development reflects the principle that consciousness is identification. Awareness consists in the recognition of what is. Each act of perception is an act of identification, and each integration refines the precision with which identification occurs. The evolution of cognitive theory thus leads not away from philosophical first principles, but toward them. As empirical research clarifies the mechanisms through which perception, learning, and memory operate, it increasingly reveals that knowledge is possible because existence possesses structure and consciousness possesses the capacity to identify that structure. Integration is the process through which this capacity becomes progressively more effective. Perception becomes clearer as integration becomes more coherent. Knowledge expands as relations become more stable. Meaning deepens as identity is grasped across wider contexts. The unified model, therefore, culminates in a philosophical recognition, the alignment of organism and world through recursive integration is the psychological expression of the metaphysical fact that existence exists and the epistemological fact that consciousness identifies existence. Cognitive development is the progressive realization of this correspondence. The mind does not create reality, nor does it passively mirror it. It actively identifies the structure that reality already possesses. Through differentiation, integration, and memory, consciousness becomes increasingly adequate to existence. Knowledge grows as identification becomes more precise. Meaning emerges as relations become more coherent. In this way, the evolution of perception and cognition reflects the unfolding of the axiomatic relationship between being and awareness. The continual integration of the one in the many. If perception is the primary interface between individual and environment, dialogue is the extended interface between conscious beings attempting to coordinate their respective integrations of reality. Through perception, the individual differentiates structure in the world. Through dialogue, individuals differentiate structure in each other's understanding of the world. Dialogue, therefore, becomes the medium through which comprehension is tested, refined, and expanded across contexts of interaction: educational, developmental, social, and commercial. It is not merely the exchange of verbal content, but the mutual calibration of integrative processes operating within distinct minds. Each participant in dialogue brings a structured history of perception, memory, prediction, and valuation. No two individuals integrate experience in precisely the same manner. Differences in conceptual hierarchy, attentional weighing, emotional salience, and epistemic method generate variation in how reality is interpreted. Dialogue exposes these differences. Where alignment occurs, meaning stabilizes. Where misalignment persists, further differentiation becomes necessary. Dialogue, therefore, functions as a higher order perceptual field in which the object of observation is not only the external environment, but the structure of another consciousness attempting to understand that environment. Through dialogue, each participant becomes both observer and observed within a shared process of integration. The relational dynamics of dialogue may be understood through three primary orientations of integrative attention: I it, I thou, and I. Each represents a distinct mode through which comprehension is developed and coordinated. In the I-it relation, dialogue is directed toward an object, task, or problem. The primary aim is operational clarity, the identification of relevant variables, and the establishment of reliable procedures for achieving defined outcomes. Scientific discourse, technical collaboration, and commercial negotiation exemplify this mode. Participants seek coherence in their models of reality sufficiently to produce coordinated action. Differences in interpretation are evaluated according to their consequences for effectiveness. The emphasis falls upon accuracy, consistency, and replicability of integration. Dialogue refines shared structure so that action may proceed with reduced uncertainty. In the I-thou relation, dialogue becomes oriented toward the interior structure of another consciousness. Here, the aim is not merely agreement about external objects, but recognition of the manner in which the other organizes meaning and value. Educational and therapeutic contexts often depend upon this relational mode. The teacher seeks not only to transmit content, but to understand how the student differentiates and integrates knowledge. The therapist seeks to understand how the individual organizes emotional experience and identity. Dialogue in this mode refines sensitivity to differences in perception, context, and motivation. Through mutual recognition of subjectivity, participants develop greater adaptability in coordinating their integrations. In the I relation, dialogue becomes internalized as reflective self-integration. The individual becomes both speaker and listener, evaluating the coherence of one's own perceptions, values, and actions. Reflection allows contradictions to be identified and resolved. Through internal dialogue, the individual refines conceptual structure and stabilizes identity across time. This mode ensures continuity of integration within the self, providing the structural stability necessary for meaningful participation in interpersonal dialogue. Across these relational modes, dialogue functions as a mechanism for adaptive alignment. Misunderstanding reveals divergence in conceptual or perceptual structure. Questioning reveals implicit assumptions that guide interpretation. Explanation reveals the methods through which integration has occurred. Agreement reveals shared invariants that stabilize meaning across participants. Through repeated cycles of interaction, dialogue increases the probability of convergence toward coherent understanding. Differences between participants generate informational gradients that stimulate further integration, much as perceptual discrepancies stimulate refinement of cognition within the individual. Degrees of comprehension become observable through dialogue. Where integration is limited, communication tends to focus on isolated content. Misinterpretations arise because participants lack shared structures through which relations among ideas may be perceived. As integration increases, conceptual relations become clearer, cooperation becomes more stable, and trust becomes possible. At higher levels of integration, participants increasingly anticipate each other's reasoning processes. Dialogue becomes generative rather than corrective. New insights emerge through cooperative integration rather than individual effort alone. Comprehension deepens not merely because more information is exchanged, but because shared methods of integration become more refined. Educational development illustrates this progression. Instruction is most effective when dialogue improves the learner's capacity to integrate knowledge rather than merely transmitting informational content. Developmental maturation likewise depends upon dialogue that enables the individual to coordinate perception, emotion, and value into coherent identity. Social relations stabilize when dialogue aligns expectations sufficiently to permit reliable cooperation. Commercial relations succeed when dialogue clarifies the structure of value exchange and the conditions under which mutual benefit may occur. In each context, dialogue functions as the medium through which integration propagates across individuals and across time. Dialogue thus represents the social extension of the perception integration process. Just as perception aligns the individual with environmental structure, dialogue aligns consciousness with consciousness. Each participant becomes part of the informational environment of the other. Interpersonal interaction, therefore, becomes a recursive integration across multiple cognitive systems. Shared meaning emerges when relational structures converge sufficiently to guide coordinated action and mutual understanding. In this sense, dialogue expresses at the interpersonal level the same fundamental relationship observed at the individual level. Consciousness seeks to identify existence. Each consciousness attempts to align its internal structure with the structure of reality, and dialogue allows multiple consciousness to compare the results of that alignment. Differences in comprehension become opportunities for further differentiation and integration. Through dialogue, the individual not only refines one's understanding of the world, but also refines one's understanding of how others understand the world. Dialogue, therefore, becomes an essential mechanism in the development of knowledge, value, and cooperation. It is the medium through which degrees of comprehension become observable and modifiable, allowing the relational models of I it, I thou, and I to operate within a shared context of interaction. As integration increases within and between participants, dialogue becomes more precise, more adaptive, and more generative. Through this process, shared meaning emerges as the structured outcome of reciprocal identification. Dialogue becomes the living interface through which consciousness participates in the ongoing task of understanding existence and coordinating action within it. Dialogue is the medium through which the internal structures of cognition become externally observable. Through dialogue, the degree of coherence within a person's perceptions, concepts, values, and intentions become progressively evident. Trust emerges when this observable coherence demonstrates stability across time, consistency across contexts, and effectiveness in producing reality-aligned outcomes. Dialogue, therefore, functions as the principal interface through which trust becomes epistemically justifiable rather than merely emotionally assumed. The formulation T in parentheses CP may be expanded more fully as trustworthiness approximates the function of TTCP, where TT, temporal consistency of integration, C, contextual coherence of integration, and P, causal productivity of integration. Dialogue provides the evidentiary field in which each of these dimensions become perceptible. Temporal consistency refers to the persistence of integrative structure across time. Through repeated dialogue, patterns of reasoning, standards of evidence, and orientation toward reality become increasingly visible. Individuals who demonstrate stable principles across multiple conversations reveal continuity of integration rather than opportunistic adaptation to momentary pressures. Dialogue thus acts as a longitudinal sampling mechanism through which the trajectory of a person's integration becomes measurable. Trust increases when dialogue reveals that judgments and commitments are not episodic fluctuations, but expressions of stable structure. Contextual coherence refers to the stability of integrative method across varying domains of experience. Dialogue occurring in different contexts, technical, interpersonal, ethical, strategic, reveals whether the same principles of reasoning operate consistently across situations. A person whose logic changes arbitrarily depending upon social pressure or situational advantage demonstrates fragmentation of integration. Dialogue exposes these discontinuities because differences in application become visible when similar structural problems arise in different contexts. Trust increases when dialogue reveals that an individual applies consistent standards of evidence and reasoning regardless of circumstance. Causal productivity refers to the capacity of integrative structure to generate effective action within reality. Dialogue does not remain confined to verbal exchange. It informs decision-making and coordinated behavior. When dialogue leads to predictions that correspond with outcomes, confidence in the underlying integration increases. When dialogue leads repeatedly to contradiction between assertion and result, trust declines. Causal productivity, therefore, represents the pragmatic validation of integration. Dialogue allows hypotheses, plans, and interpretations to be tested against reality through cooperative activity. Trust increases when dialogue consistently contributes to constructive consequences. The three relational models, I, it, I, thou, and I, each contribute distinct dimensions to the trust function. Within the I, it mode, dialogue reveals causal productivity most directly. Competence becomes observable through the accuracy of analysis, the precision of distinctions, and reliability of outcomes. Technical collaboration allows participants to evaluate the structural coherence of each other's thinking through shared engagement with external constraints. Trust in professional or scientific contexts depends heavily upon the consistency with which dialogue contributes to effective problem solving. Within the I-thou mode, dialogue reveals contextual coherence. Interpersonal dialogue exposes how individuals interpret meaning, responsibility, and value across relational contexts. Emotional regulation, responsiveness to feedback, and openness to correction indicate whether integration remains stable when variables shift from purely technical to personally significant. Trust in relationships depends upon the perception that the other maintains continuity of principle even when situations involve vulnerability or ambiguity. Within the I mode, dialogue reveals temporal consistency through reflective self-correction. Individuals who openly revise their interpretations in response to new information demonstrate commitment to integration rather than defense of prior error. Internal dialogue expressed through articulation of reasoning processes makes visible the trajectory of learning across time. Trust increases when individuals demonstrate capacity to integrate error into improved understanding rather than conceal or rationalize contradiction. Dialogue, therefore, functions as an epistemic instrument through which integration becomes observable across the variables of time, context, and consequence. Each conversational exchange provides data regarding how an individual differentiates evidence, resolves contradiction, assigns value, and predicts outcomes. Over multiple interactions, these observations accumulate into an increasingly reliable estimate of structural coherence. Trust may thus be understood not as a primary emotional disposition, but as a cognitive evaluation of integrative reliability. It represents an inductive judgment regarding the probability that future dialogue and action will maintain alignment with reality. When dialogue reveals high coherence across temporal, contextual, and causal dimensions, uncertainty regarding future interaction decreases. The reduction of uncertainty corresponds to increased confidence in the stability of relational coordination. In this way, dialogue extends the perception integration process into the interpersonal domain. Just as perception allows the individual to evaluate the reliability of relations within the environment, dialogue allows individuals to evaluate the reliability of relations among integrating consciousnesses. Trust emerges when repeated dialogue demonstrates that another's process of identification remain aligned with the structure of reality across multiple conditions. Dialogue thus becomes the social mechanism through which integration propagates across individuals. Trust becomes the recognition that another consciousness demonstrates sufficient coherence of integration to justify reliance upon its judgments and commitments. The function T in parentheses CP expresses in formal terms what dialogue reveals experientially, that stable relations among perception, reasoning, and action provide the basis for cooperative engagement with reality. This is the one in the many. The principle of life is the process of integration from a single cell to an ideal human being. The story of life unfolds through integration, from a single percept to a library of knowledge. Through virtue, reason, honesty, independence, selfishness, productivity, you set your values, purpose, to achieve self-esteem and happiness. Through time and energy, from induction to integration to reduction, the smallest particle unifies matter, and the highest purpose unifies your life. You, the one in the many, matter. May you integrate your life with value-driven days.